Now let me explain to you the detailed LVI components and household indicators. The socio-demographic profile uses four important indicators: the percentage of households with a dependency ratio of more than 1.5, the percentage of female-headed households that don't get remittances from male migrants worker, the percentage of household with a head aged more than 65 years, which make it harder to do field work during the monsoon showing peaks. And the fourth is the percentage of adult who cannot read or write. This make it harder to get weather advisories and government schemes entitlement. All of these are added together to find the demographic pressure that are making India's agroclimatic zones less able to deal with climate change. Now let me explain to you the Livelihood Vulnerability Index and Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Framework Mapping and Comparative Analysis. In this combines the biophysical hazard signature through weighted average, prioritizing disaster frequencies, realizing that household memory outperform long-term climate statistics for adaptation planning. Students, the average exposure of district with a failure in the onset of monsoon is 0.72. Now, the question is, what is the sensitivity? As I have explained you in my previous lecture the concept of exposure and sensitivity, now you will be able to understand the application of exposure and sensitivity. You have to understand the factors and then you have to apply it in the concept. Now let me explain to you the application of sensitivity. This equally aggregates immediate threat vectors. Such an analysis showed that the compounded effect of water, food and health deficits in female-headed households make them 1.9 times more sensitive during floods. And the third is adaptive capacity. This inversely correlates with vulnerability. So with this, we can see that the average adaptive capacity of irrigated village is 0.28 as compared to the average adaptive capacity of rain-fed laborer settlement, which is 0.12. This clearly confirms the diversification of social capital buffers. Therefore, composite LVI and IPCC helps us to assess the cross-study comparability. According to the assessment, Indian average at 0.42, Bangladesh coastal zones average at 0.58 and Ethiopian highlands at 0.67, which is extreme. So I have shown you the sensitivity indexes, that is of 3 levels like medium, high and very high. Now you can refer this particular table to understand how the calculation has been done. For this particular calculation, the first category is of components. You can see different components such as socio-demographic, livelihood strategies, social network, health, food, water and climate variability. And the livelihood variability index weight, that is coming 0.14 for all the components. Then calculation of LVI IPCC mapping, which is 33% for all the components. You can see the adaptive capacity, sensitivity and exposure measurement. Adaptive capacity and sensitivity percentage is 33%, whereas the exposure percentage is 25% related to the component of climate variability. Few examples I would like to cite from livelihood strategies. You can see that the adaptive capacity is 33%, where it is more than 80% of the agriculture. In the same way, different months and different factors have been taken to calculate the threshold level of related components. Students, now let us understand the livelihood and vulnerability, both the components together. With the increasing intensity of climate change and increasing socio-economic stress or strain, the need to quantify the level of susceptibility of households, groups, and areas to damage has gained significance in the mission of researchers, planners, and policymakers. Livelihoods are assets, activities, and capabilities necessary to sustain oneself. These dimensions are strained, which leads to vulnerability. To illustrate, when farmers in the rural area depend on the rainfall to carry out their farming activities, the farmers will have their lives at risk because of drought. In the event that fishermen rely only on natural stocks of fish, then they are susceptible to such change as a result of environmental degradation. In the same way, when the households are not saving, have no education, diversified income base, and a good social network, they will not be able to respond to shocks. Therefore, to measure livelihood vulnerability, one should look at a relatively broad range of interconnected factors, the task that livelihood vulnerability index is supposed to accomplish. So now let me explain to you the livelihood vulnerability index applications. Livelihood vulnerability index is a tool that is used to evaluate crop susceptibility, irrigation use, soil erosion, growing seasonal changes, and the flexibility of the farmers. The LVI helps to assess the water shortage, potable water, availability, irrigation reliance, and community drought resilience. Cyclones, rising sea level, as well as coastal erosion are some of the hazards experienced by coastal communities. The livelihood of the people in the mountain rely on climate sensitive enterprise such as terraced agriculture, horticulture, and livestock. Students, livelihood vulnerability index assists the government to organize in advanced warning system, education, and disaster preparedness interventions according to the pattern of vulnerability. So you can understand how these two are interrelated. For example, the poor people in urban area are usually vulnerable as a result of poor house, sanitation, infrastructure, and working condition. So the LVI is used to come up with vulnerable populations like fishermen, fish seller, low income coastal communities. Students, LVI results are used by governments to rank the allocation of resources, develop climate adaptation policies, and track sustainable development. Livelihood Vulnerability Index offers the balance between the comprehensive approach and the pragmatic approach. Very population in studying vulnerability in states and communities in India. Now, after all these explanation, let me also explain to you the data limitation of the Livelihood Vulnerability Index. Students, the quality of the data is poor and decreasing the reliability. Each indicator and each component tend to have an equal weight when in fact certain aspects of vulnerability are more powerful. Livelihood Vulnerability Index can be vulnerable at one particular moment. It can fail to reflect any changes in time or any trend. The outcome of Livelihood Vulnerability Index are determined by the regional setting. Now the question is, what can be area will between, and there is a number of framework used to evaluate vulnerability, among which their areas are. The Household Vulnerability Index is linked to how effectively a nation is managing its resources. The Household Vulnerability Index is associated with level at which the country is utilizing its resources. These includes climate change, vulnerability, the extent to which previously stable climate conditions may cause economic impacts over the long term. Frequently, such changes are termed as climate change. Students, now let me explain to you the pedagogical applications in geography curriculum. The Livelihood Vulnerability Index helps to equip the students of geography by making them proficient with mixed methods. This helps bridge rural appraisal, spatial statistics, classroom exercises, encourage students to engage in mock household survey, and validate the results against Google Earth hazards mapping to construct livelihood vulnerability index profile of villages. They can then present interventions matrices to mock district collector boards, developing themselves into reflexive professionals attuned to vulnerabilities, spatial, politics, and seasonal rhythms. Livelihood Vulnerability Index is given an important position with geography curricula as it helps to link physical climate signal with human livelihood trajectories. It also plays an important role in cultivating spatial epidemiologist skills to track vulnerability gradients across agroclimatic verticals from coastal salinization zone to rain shadow agrarian crisis.